So trees, hugely important to us for all sorts of reasons that we're becoming increasingly aware of. First of all, obviously through just a very that they produce oxygen, they store carbon, and they're a habitat for creatures, other creatures, kind of things we regard as pests and diseases. But some of these things, including viruses, can be very important to the way that we live. This island was covered in trees at one stage, and because of our history, a lot of those trees were taken down, and we're left with one of, in terms of tree cover, one of the best places to grow trees, but one of the barest nations, certainly in Europe.
Desert, really, compared to some other.
We really are. And originally, we would have had a good mix of trees, but mainly deciduous trees, broadleaf deciduous trees, and now we have a lot of fast-growing things like Sitka spruce, which have been promoted in the past because there's a very fast return on them. They'll grow on land that isn't great for other stuff, but increasingly we're becoming aware that we should have a much greater mix of trees, a mix between broadleaves and conifers. My relationship with trees, of course, it's all about growing up, isn't it? So I grew up on a suburban road called Fairways in Rathfarnham. It's about 4 or 5 miles outside Dublin city centre. On the road where I grew up, my parents planted what everybody planted in suburban Dublin in 1970, which was cherry trees, because
yeah, cool.
Well, cool to a degree, but my mother was a butcher. She wasn't a professional butcher. She was a butcher when it came to plants and trees, and she didn't like anything kind of getting too big. So she brought in a guy with a saw every single, and it's a shame because the natural shape of the tree was lost. People planted cherry trees because they made suburbia look really good in terms of their flower, because they were small garden trees, but they came with their issues. The first issue was that kind of surface rooting and mowing a lawn underneath them can be a bit of a challenge. They can lift footpaths and curbstones and whatever. Outside on the roadway, I thought it was very good what the council planted, because they planted sorbus, different types of roses. And you got lovely foliage from that. You got really wonderful flower. Really kind of decadent, almost Art Deco, those groups, those bunches of berries. So that was my upbringing. But, you know, the sight of that man with the chainsaw coming once a year to prune the cherry trees. Cherry trees, very popular when kids were making their first Holy Communion, because the 3 people in the waiting room, because you know, little girls and little boys dress up to the nines in their white, look great and very pious under that pastel cloud. Where I found really adventurous, however, as a kid, was going to Bushy Park. So that was down the road, across the fields, crossing a river, just stepping stones across a river, and into a walled garden. Public park, originally the ancestral home of the George Bernard Shaw family. Part of that had a woodland, and what a woodland. As a young lad who was a bit of a loner, getting lost in this place that was full of the light of mystery and huge deciduous trees, along with some pines and whatever. And some of these trees were going up what appeared to be a cliff face. So it was a great place just to get lost in kind of controlled nature or parkland. This woodland had an ice house in it. It had a grotto, which was very kind of Gothic, and I absolutely loved it. To the extent that when I was 7 or 8, I used to get my dad's shovels and spades from the garage and go into that park, and I'd make my younger sisters follow me, and I would landscape a public park and plant my own trees. I know, I was weird. I was absolutely weird. But the love of trees stayed with me. When eventually I went to college, which was the College of Amenity Horticulture, in the National Botanic Gardens in Dublin. They have a magnificent collection of trees, and we got to propagate through cuttings, but I remember germinating seeds of birch trees, and those birch trees are now, 30-year old, and they're planted outside the house that my mom has just moved from in the past few years. In my work, I travel a lot, I see trees everywhere, and we have the great joy of working with very big trees. In the past 2 years, we've been, Paul and myself, along with two other lads, James and Michael, have brought the biggest trees ever brought into this country to plant in a private garden in Dublin. It was a remarkable experience. We had 21 trees, 7 different species. Some of them were relatively, well, not so big, ginkgo bilobas, others, metasequoias, just monsters and amazing. And we were playing with all the toys, bringing the cranes, the diggers, and a huge amount of good organic matter to put them in. And also learning so much about it. We brought a consultant in from Germany and learning about how these trees in time, because it's the sheer weight would sink. It was very challenging to plant them because we were planting this time of the year. We only had a week or two to go. If we missed that deadline for planting these, not bare rooted, but wrapped root balls, it would have been too late. We had to get them in before they came into leaf. We discovered during that project that it's very hard to get evergreen trees, and the client would have loved some big evergreens, but they just rare at that size or don't transplant. The project that we're working on for the United Nations is all about the International Year of Plant Health. And it's so important that we're aware of our obligations as householders, as gardeners, or as people interested in plants and interested in trees. You will know that there are all sorts of pests and diseases that attack trees. And in this country, it's been ash, hasn't it?
Well, it started in the 70s with Dutch elm disease. I grew up in County Carlow, and the fields around Carlow would have been covered in elm trees in the 70s and 80s. And the last of them were kind of cut down as I grew up, because unfortunately they were pretty much wiped out from this country. And now it's starting with ash dieback, and we've got problems with oak, and we've got bacterial cankers with chestnuts. And we have, unfortunately, more problems than we have solutions at the moment. But
some of those trees, for instance, lime trees, form great avenues in Dublin. And to see them cut down 20, 25 years ago was absolutely awful. So we have to be aware that there are, in other places around the world, there are diseases like Xiella, which is attacking the olive trees. And 2 years ago, when we were allowed to travel, we were on our holidays in Puglia, in the southeast of Italy, and I saw hundreds of acres of olive trees grown as family businesses for generations, just absolutely wiped out. There is a whole system to ensure that we have a natural advantage in Ireland because we're an island, we're on the west of Europe, and the Europeans run a really good system of plant passports. So any tree, anything you bring into this country that has soil attached to it, or it's a big specimen, needs to be checked. It needs, first of all, to have a plant passport, and it needs to be checked out by the Department of Agriculture. They now have an area in Dublin Port that they can physically look at every single plant, or one plant from a consignment of plants, and all the plants that come into this country are traceable. So there's big opportunities for growers, for nursery people in this country to look at what people want to grow and to specialize in that, to look at not only the species, but the shape, the size, all of these type of things. As gardeners who are interested in gardening and possibly traveling, we have a huge obligation ourselves that we don't take slips or cuttings anymore when we're abroad and bring anything back into this country. We know from these programs that we see about the Australian Border Force on television how protective countries can be about their native flora and fauna, and we have to be the same. So we all have to be aware, but we also all should have our eyes open in our own gardens, in other people's gardens, or in public parks. Because if you notice anything that is slightly unusual, ring the department and let them know. And they do an amazing job. And if there's a caterpillar that shouldn't be there that you haven't seen before, if there's a disease that just looks a little bit odd or a little bit strange, especially in an area that has been newly planted, ring them. They'll send somebody out instantly. Actually, it happened in Bushy Park in Rathfarnham. We've had things like fire blight that's attacked things like pyrocanthus and other species. They'll identify it. They'll take away the species that they'll destroy it. They will find out where every plant from that batch of trees that have been grown originated from, and they'll track them all down. So they're keeping us safe. As Paul says, we have a natural advantage on this island in that, because we don't have people driving across borders.
But we all have a responsibility, and that's as much as where we source our plants from, that we source them from reputable suppliers who are either growing them or importing them correctly. And in fact, every garden centre that's selling to the public will be able to tell you pretty much where that tree came from, and the passport will be able to tell you that as well. So we are doing all the right things, but we just have to be extra vigilant.
With trees and with all plants, so if we can all keep our eyes open. And that is having an effect on the supply chain. Paul worked in a brilliant nursery in North Wales called Creek Farm, which was developed by Sue and Bledden. And they are plant hunters. They've brought all sorts of extraordinary species in from all around the world. But because of Brexit now, so regulation on top of regulation, we're not allowed source plants from nurseries or that, or indeed from any nursery in England that hasn't been passed. If any of the soil is touching the ground, new regulations are making life, for good reasons, quite challenging. All of that will take a while to sort out. I just want to walk you through my inspiration in terms of the past year. I've told you about going to this park, Bushy Park, looking at the broadleaf trees, been full of wonder in a kind of Enid Blyton or type way of trees. Absolutely loving the sunshine coming through the dappled foliage. You and trees, where did that start?
Well, where I grew up in Carlow, I was very, very lucky. Grew up in a farm, so had lots of space to run around, and obviously there were trees everywhere, and still are. Over in Mayo was where my mum was from, and my granny there had in the 70s planted a load of leilandis around their farmhouse, and they were never cut. And as gardeners, and people hear the word leilandi, and it fills them with fear. But as kids, leilandi trees that had never been cut for 30 or 40 years was the best playground ever. And their branches are quite bendy, and you can climb up into them. And we just had the most fun growing up there and playing in them. But what I did last year, and what really, really got me excited, was just before lockdown and before COVID really became a big issue, I bought 50 oak trees from a nursery up the road from us in Carlow. And I planted them in a corner of a field on the farm that I'd asked my dad. He planted some trees there a few years previously for firewood, and there was one little patch left. So I planted 50 oak trees. And all through the first lockdown last year, I was going down there pretty much every other day, having a look and seeing the new buds coming. And just that was €50. The 50 trees cost me €50. If you buy a tree as a whips, which is basically a year or 2 year old tree, it cost you nothing, and that was the best €50 I spent in 2020. So that's another point. Trees are, very, very good value for money, what you get, particularly if you get smaller ones. So worth it.
And if you get smaller trees, particularly if they're native trees, they will put small trees and plant them small at this time of the year, come to the end of the planting season if they're bare rooted, but they will outpace mature specimens, and they're not the huge ones that we brought in.
Well, in saying that, those huge trees that we brought in will take years and years and years to establish, whereas a year-old tree will, be up 20 foot in 15 years' time. So it's incredible how much growth they can make up when they're put in small trees.
So a whip, a 1 year old stem, is going to get used to the site and the situation and the winds and everything you have, and it'll become strong very, very fast. You do have to look at it. It won't be uniform. It won't be one of these things that's grown in a European nursery that's grown to be absolutely straight. It will probably be feathered, which will mean it'll have side branches coming from the base up. That's the style of tree that I really love. And I think that's a great thing to do. Paul, you reminded me, I just said I grew up in Rathfarnham. And in Rathfarnham, there was a Hallmark cards factory. So it was a factory that produced greeting cards, but that factory was built in the grounds of an old stately home or an old big house, and they had an old Leylandii hedge, which people who made the factory left. And it was just the best. Climbing through that, a row of 7 trees, up and down, was just the best. And that counted as an adventure for us kids. So I agree with you. And Leylandiis, when they're kept trim, they're one of the best hedges you can get.
They're so tough, they can take wind, they can take salt wind, they just sort of have a bad rep. And in a suburban setting, maybe not the best, but in the correct place. And they're not a native tree, that's another thing. But I think we are gardeners and we feel that pretty much every tree has a place, in the right situation. So yeah, it's all about the age-old thing of right plant, right place.
So I'm now loading photographs, and if this doesn't go wrong,
we'll be doing very well.
We'll be doing very, very happy. Usually, as I said, we broadcast over Instagram, and even Mike can do Instagram. Even if you're very, very old, you can manage that. That's only 1 or 2 buttons, but Zoom is.
We're about to, when Diarmuid's finished, show you, Diarmuid's going to show you trees that inspire, trees that you can grow in your own garden, because we're fully aware that not everybody has the space or is lucky enough to be able to plant 50 oak trees in their garden. But that doesn't mean that there isn't space for you to plant a tree somewhere, or a small tree in a garden somewhere, or even, go to a neighbor or a friend or somebody who's got a big garden and ask them, can you plant a tree? So there is a tree for everywhere, even for pots.
So, this is great. Yeah, it's working. So, and actually, this is less intimidating. We can't see you anymore. All we see is the picture of a tree. Oh, we see some of you now. Unfortunately, we still see Mike. But anyway, this is a couple of years ago. I went through a really tough time, and I couldn't overestimate how tough the time was. It was all caused by something that went wrong with a client who was very powerful in every way and really quite intimidating. And it seemed, behind the scenes, like my life was ending. It was just so awful. And I didn't know how to get out of this. I didn't know how to deal with it. And he could have, as it was, kind of taken everything, taken me and taken everything. And the one decision I made was, we had a chat about it here, and I said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to buy a pass to a place called the Powerscourt Estate in Enniskerry in County Wicklow. And I'm going to go there every day and walk the dogs. And I'm just going to have some thinking time. So that's what I did it was 6 months before COVID, and right through COVID and until now, that's what I did. So if you're walking in an estate that there aren't many people around in, it can be an amazing and beautiful thing. I went there in a solitary way, just with my thoughts. To give a little background about this area. So Powerscourt is a grand big house in Enniskerry, County Wicklow, built by an important family and with a landscape designed by an important person called Robinson. The 7th Viscount found greatest satisfaction in planting trees on the estate and planted over 1,300 acres during his lifetime, saying nobody can say I haven't left my mark on the country. The native trees, so it's a big estate, one area of it is the waterfall. The native trees at the waterfall where I walk every day are oak, and originally the whole area would have been an oak forest. During the 20th century, there was a large demand for mature oak, and the forest at the waterfall was felled over a number of years. But there are still oak trees and a couple of other species of trees, so it's a gorgeous place to visit. So this is just through the past year, spring, summer, autumn, winter, me just looking at trees some of which are oak, some of which are otter. And there's some majesty about them. Now, here you have space, you have shelter, it's down in a bit of a valley, you have room for the trees to grow, and you have good, slight but good management. So there is intervention by man. These were planted as a plantation years ago with the idea of future generations, but also with the idea of them just being beautiful things. Maybe years ago we wouldn't have been aware of our environmental responsibility in terms of these trees. But just looking now at these trees, generally in the morning time, surrounded by with underplanting of bracken.
Well, you say that, but obviously the seventh Viscount or whatever he was appreciated the beauty of a tree and the shape and the form and everything else the tree brings. He might have understood the whole environmental impact, but trees have been kind of worshipped for a long time, haven't they?
Absolutely. But people like that, the seventh Viscount or Louis XIV at Seaside, they would have a different attitude towards trees, wouldn't they? Being able to plant your own forest would have made you very powerful.
Well, he said it. He wanted to make his mark.
He wanted to make his mark, but that was also his mark in society, how important, how cultured, all of that sort of thing. Natural woodlands, funnily enough, were often seen, especially around the time of Lynott, were seen as dangerous places of highwaymen, disease, wild animals, uncontrolled and unsophisticated places. But your own woodland,
up in Kerry.
Your own woodland would have been something else, and this was his own woodland and his own playground.
That picture illustrates quite well all of the other, excuse me, of the other things that live on trees. It's not just bugs and insects and things that pollinate from the trees, or they take pollen from the trees, but trees support lichens and mosses and algae and all sorts of other lives. A mature oak tree, I think, supports over 280 different creatures and species, which is incredible.
So, and the important thing about it is, if it's a native tree, it'll support an awful lot more than an imported tree, and it'll support an awful lot more of our ecosystem.
The oak tree being the kind of king of supporting as many different species as possible from one tree, 280 something.
So all the photosynthesis, all the light, all the carbon saving that's going on in any of these species, and here we see the waterfall in the background. I particularly like trees when they're backlit. A lot of my garden is designed around being seen from under a veranda here, where there are pillars, almost a cloister garden, looking at, and the sun in the evenings, much like these photographs, coming through the foliage is just really magnificent. So the trees here in Powerscourt really did calm me down, get me through. Didn't help that every day when I went on my walks, I'd listen to a podcast from the New York Times called The Daily. And generally over the past 18 months, that has been charting Donald Trump, and will he or will he not be re-elected? And that isn't great for, so while the trees were calming me down, the podcast was really getting me going in another way. But I do listen to music, I listen to all sorts of podcasts, and I do spend my time with the dogs. It's not only the big beech, as we're seeing here, it's not only the big oak, but it can be more humble trees like silver birch that I found on the Powerscourt estate. And if you look very closely there, can you see a little doggy in the center of it? That's, did you notice?
No.
That's Bowie, who's a little brat, but he's an adorable little brat. Paul, we particularly like this one, don't we?
Yeah, so this is a giant sequoia, Sequoia dendron giganteum, I think is its botanical name. And while these grow really well here, the place to see these are in forests of North America,
where California
too, and they're just incredible. You can drive cars through the bottom of these. I think, are they the biggest tree, biggest kind of living,
and some of the oldest?
They live for thousands of years, and they just grow. They get quite big here. I think Castle have actually started to plant a grove of them, which is going to be very exciting in years and years to come, and they are just incredible. That photo doesn't do it justice. You have to stand at the base of one of these and you just look up.
You show me your photos.
Sorry?
You show me your photos.
No photo does anything justice.
Okay.
Not your photo. It's no photo will do it justice. And this is another cool plant.
This is the Oricaria oricana, the monkey puzzle, and this is a seedling that has decided, or an offshoot, I think, from an original one that was there. I've planted one of these in my garden. They're from Chile originally, and the tree arrived into these islands because the British ambassador to Chile nicked one of the seeds and brought it home. He wasn't allowed to have one, so he nicked one and introduced it. Called monkey puzzles because it was said it would puzzle a monkey if they tried to figure out how to climb it. Often planted in Edwardian and Victorian front, really small front gardens as the centerpiece to a floral bed, but with people not realizing how they grow, really architectural plants. And again, I have a veranda, so I've planted one just outside beyond the veranda in the hope that it'll grow up and, we'll be living in the trees. So almost enough of part. Oh, there's it's just a birch, but look at the shape of it. Isn't it gorgeous? So this is a tree that would be suitable for many sites, many situations, and many types of gardens. It's not a showy off type species. You'll get all sorts of different birch. People really like Betula, Armania, any of the white bark species are good. But look at the golden shade that the leaves turn going into the fall or the autumn. Absolutely beautiful and really easy because it's a very light foliage, really easy to grow other plants underneath them. You do have some of those issues with surface rooting. You do have to be careful when you transplant things like birch trees because
they are one of the easiest trees to grow, and they do so well in lots of gardens. They're also a nice small one. They're kind of known as pioneer species. So if they're the first trees that start to grow in the newly established forests, and they kind of paved the way then for all the majestic oaks and all those things.
Newly established forests are, that program that loads of people have been watching, Chernobyl. Birch trees would have been one of the trees to come back after an area been devastated. Birch in pots can last for years. Yeah, they're a great tree for a plot. And there's the other shaggy dog. That is Roxy at the waterfall. There's Bowie and Roxy in the background. And, again, this is planted, this particular birch, which probably self-seeded, is on a sloping site. So I just love. And again, I look at these trees every single day, and the dogs think I'm absolutely mad taking out the iPhone and photographing another bloody tree. But look how the foliage hangs below the stem of the tree. Isn't that glorious?
You don't get that too often.
You don't get it too often. And also with birch trees, actually, you don't notice them too often because they're just there. But I have a ribbon of these planted in my front garden. Obviously, autumn color with any of these and everything I've shown you so far is absolutely glorious. This is perched down by, on this, we've taken, if I want to keep the dogs clean, I bring them on this walk. What are they? What beach? Beach, youngish beach. With good clean leaves for dogs.
Forests don't tend to allow a lot of other things to grow underneath them. I don't know why. It must be something that inhibits growth.
There's a lot of trees like this. Cherry laurel is actually the same. They produce some sort of toxin that doesn't allow anything, so there's no competition underneath. Walnuts are
it's difficult to plant stuff underneath. Yeah, it's just trees have all developed to be the kind of best survivor, so they all have different little tricks and ways of surviving, and one of them is to stop other plants growing near them.
It's funny though that this is beech, because a lot of beech will keep their leaf right through. So we've just planted a mature beech hedge. The last few days Paul has just planted a mature beech hedge in a 2.5 meter high in a garden in Dublin, and that is full of leaf.
It's when you clip beech though, when it's in shelter. So the more you clip it, the more it holds onto its leaf, which is why it makes really fantastic. Probably one of the best hedging plants. That's a bit of a brushing statement.
Because holly is good too, isn't it?
Yeah, they're all
everything they go for. Yeah, this would be Parscourt last summer, and we always say green is a color too, and just
grey.
Just going up, this is one of the big beech up by the children's playground, which is absolutely majestic. And I'm going to move on. And this is some of those trees just now, how they're looking now. just before leaf is.
They're just as beautiful in their kind of naked form. You know, the architectural value of a tree is quite fantastic. It's fascinating, really, to see how it grows and that shape that it makes and how they adapt. In the wintertime, you always see the way a tree structure has adapted to where it's growing. You often see it on the side of hills or on scraggy slopes. I lived for a long time up in the mountains of Snowdonia and up in the side heaps there. And there was quite often birch and hawthorn that were naturally bonsai. So bonsai is kind of this thing that we do to trees to keep them small. But if you grow trees on basically a pile of stones, they would do that without you wanting to do anything. And I know of a guy who took one from one of these side heaps thinking, oh, this is a great bonsai birch tree from my garden, planted it into his garden, and within 2 or 3 years, the birch tree had realized it was real soil again and had grown up 10 times the height and kind of got real roots. So bonsai is a form of looking after trees that is very much human sort of interaction.
It is, and if you want to see trees that have been naturally bonsaied, on our Instagram broadcast the other day, we were talking about the burn in County Clare, which is a natural outcrop of limestone rock, which is absolutely extraordinary. And in the cracks and crevices, with the protection from the Atlantic, the winds coming in off the Atlantic Ocean, you find just really incredible bonsai species. Would you call them bonsai? Because bonsai is really a man-made art form.
Yeah, I suppose so. You know, natural bonsai.
Natural bonsai. I just took, this is from the UK, and it's an image I found in Country Life magazine. I think the photographer's name was O'Neill, and he was Sean O'Neill maybe, and he was really interested in the fact, he planned this photograph for absolutely months because it's just glorious, isn't it? So first thing in the morning, the bluebells woods. But what he was interested in is the fact that bluebells are normally only found under the canopy of trees, and here they are out in the open, so you really get this magnificent light on them here. And I posted this on Instagram, so it'll give you all the details where it is. Just interventions in forest. There's an amazing guy called Dambo, Thomas Dambo, Tomas Dambo, and he's from Denmark, and he works with local communities to use reclaimed wood, so a lot of pallet wood and whatever, and he invents these stories about trolls and mystical figures who live in the woodlands, and he creates incredible sculptures all around the world. So to get kids excited not only by trees, introduce some other elements to your garden. And there's a story behind all these trolls, and often what he makes you can climb up into, so they're quite interactive. But he makes you look at trees and nature in a different way, as does this guy, Patrick Dougherty, I think his name is, North American, and he goes around the world creating woven willow structures. Just really whimsical, really beautiful. He's been to Ireland, and of course, willow is one of these trees that is one of these.
So are they alive?
Well, it looks like they are, or they're planted up against a willow plantation, but it looks
Either way, it's cool. Yeah.
a lot of school teachers have projects with their kids. They buy bunches of willow, they get them to weave them together during the dormant season, and from now on, when watered, they'll burst into life. Yeah. So that might be the first growth in an installation that Patrick has done. Topiary, so it's not only the natural shapes. Use obviously an ancient plant species,
native one too.
A species native to this country, and look what you can do. And it's one of the few evergreen trees that you can regenerate. So and regenerate so successfully. So they grow forever and ever. You often find them in churchyards, burial grounds, and I saw them being regenerated. The old yews in the National Botanic Gardens in
Dublin. They can live up to 1,000 years as well. They're probably the longest lived native tree. So, you know, a tree can see a lot of things like that.
And actually, just going back to the yew, so useful because and when we talk about preserving what we have and preserving our native trees, if yews had died out, 20 years ago because of the disease that one of us brought in, either through an imported plant or through a cutting, or as we call them, a slip, We might have gone to Kew and into our rucksack or handbag or whatever. We just thought, we'll take a cutting of that. It'll look great in my garden. I'm a good gardener. Never ever do that anymore, because if it had brought in a pest or a disease, as we see with boxes at the moment, which is suffering from caterpillar and blight and all sorts. If that had happened to you, there are medicines that are used for the treatment or cure of cancer that we wouldn't have had.
Yeah, breast cancer, it's treated with a drug called, I think, Taxol or something like that. And it's an alkaloid that's found in yew. And until recently, it wasn't synthesized. So people actually needed yew trees to be taken into a lab to be processed and then to have that extracted from it. So plants are also, and trees are very useful as well as very beautiful. Well, they're useful in lots of different ways, not just.
Yeah, so this we're jumping from an English garden there, we're jumping across to South Africa to Pretoria, or places like Johannesburg. And I just want to show you some other joys in trees. So this is the jacaranda tree, and it's a sight to behold. I've only seen it in flower in Pretoria, but it was quite incredible. And you can see the whole suburbs are marked out in grids, avenues of jacaranda trees. And these aerial photographs are just to die for. Now, it's not a native species to South Africa, and I've worked a fair bit in South Africa, and of course they have the most incredible native flora. And you know, people tut about garden designers, landscapers, or even gardeners using plants that aren't native, because it's kind of God's country, and you know, what they can grow there is so amazing. But you wouldn't find any plantations of jacaranda going in these days. Smaller garden trees. This is a Oriental Maple, which was planted by the developers in my garden. Probably, well, it's one of the few plants that I've left in my garden. This is last summer.
I think it's called Bloodgood.
Bloodgood, it is, yeah.
But it's just the light down.
The light go through it, and I don't like Bloodgood because it's too kind of claret coloured and too dull. But backlit, again, going on that, it's heaven.
Can't beat it.
Again, going over to Japan, the ginkgo, great street tree used here, but particularly in New York. But when you see an amazing ginkgo in a monastery, look at that. The golden color of the ginkgo.
They're just brilliant. They're fossil plants. They've been around since the time of the dinosaurs. You know, there are millions and millions of years they've traced fossils of them back. And not only that, as a result, they've had lots of different adaptations, and that's why they're so good at growing in cities. I think Bristol uses it as a street tree as well, because they're so good at dealing with high levels of pollution. And a lot of our cities, a lot of trees just won't grow now because we have filled them with so many fumes and different things. But ginkgo are one of the few trees that not only grow, but actually do quite well when they're in those hostile environments. And
one of them was pretty much the bomb, the atomic bomb in Hiroshima landed on one of them, and it grew back. It grew back, just unbelievable, amazing. And this is, yeah, again, an aerial view of that carpet of gold with the color. They're not the prettiest of tree in terms of form, I don't think. No, maybe if it was, 200 years old like this one, they begin to get a bit of shape, but they're kind of go up and they creak along.
I guess that's in its native kind of habitat, whereas, we bring trees back and they grow slightly differently, but it's still a worthy garden tree and a cool one to have.
Yeah, this is one of the obvious. Again, it's another Oriental Maple, and this image is taken from the Japanese garden in Portland, which climate in Portland would have a very similar climate to what we have in here in Wicklow, and just again the shafts of sunlight coming through it. There is a very similar Oriental Maple in the rockery in the Botanic Gardens in Dublin. So it takes time for that shape to be achieved by nature. If you were pruning, you'd have to prune it very, very carefully. And in the Orient, trees like this are passed through the generations, sometimes as bonsai, sometimes as full size in pots or containers, but they're really revered. From the sublime to the cider. This is Bulmer's cider. And do you remember that great storm we had about 10 years ago?
Was it Ophelia?
The storm, maybe Ophelia, we think. All the apples from cider ended up on the ground, almost an artistic installation, a carpet of apples. They were all used. They were all harvested. They were all used.
But it proves that trees are productive and useful, and we need them for lots of other things, let alone just looking beautiful. But we can use them as productive cropping trees too.
This is just outside where we are talking to you. This is outside this room, which is a studio in the house. We have the veranda, and this was this winter. And the tree we see in the background is an ash tree, not in my garden, but in my next door neighbor's garden. So it's that idea of the borrowed landscape. And I plant right the way up to that tree. We don't see the fences or anything in this part of the garden. So it becomes part of our landscape and settles in my structures into the overall picture.
Yeah, until your neighbor chops it.
He's a very tidy gardener, so it's very possible that but he will.
Now this is fake, yes.
This isn't fake. This is Dresden.
What?
At this time of the year. Is that amazing? You do believe it, and you do know because you've seen the story.
Well,
so you're acting.
No, I'm not. I'm commenting what everyone else is probably thinking.
Do you know what you're like? You're like Nutty on Gogglebox. That's what you're like.
Well, this is a form of Gogglebox. What is it?
It's cherry trees or something like that in Dresden. It doesn't really matter, but it's real.
It's cool, whatever it is.
Yeah, it's mad. This is pictures at night. Isn't that mad?
It is.
Mike cannot get the picture of you being nutty out of his head at the moment.
What's the next tree?
This is in a nursery that before COVID lockdown I used to go to quite a lot. It's called Solitaire and it's in Belgium. And these are Carpinus, so hornbeam. And the guy who owns this particular nursery has the most brilliant eye, and he shapes them. So this is a type of topiary, but kind of humorous topiary to me. And this always reminds me, this image always reminds me of somebody's lungs, because look at it. It's like an X-ray of lungs, isn't it?
Yeah.
So these are Carpinus in Solitaire. No point, Mike, in writing anything down about this. If you have to ask the price, you can't afford it. Oh, and a tree that really gets me going.
This is probably your favorite tree. I'm a bit more skeptical.
No, it's not my favorite tree, but I just love it. Yeah.
It's Cercis canadensis, and it is native to obviously Canada
and the Americas. Yeah, North America. Yeah.
It grows in this country. It will do quite well in this country, but it won't flower quite like that in this country, I found. I'm hoping to be proven wrong on this.
Tell you what, you talk about that. I'm going to go and check on the boys in the hole for that. We're going to take credit for.
There are a couple of varieties that are available. I think Forest Pansy, a few others, but it's weird because look at that bark, and it's actually flowering on the bark, which is not the normal thing for a tree to do. Flowering the whole way down along the stem. A couple of things do that, but not a whole lot of plants will give you that effect. So it is a great plant. I think Diarmuid loves it more than I do. I like it. It's an oddity, but it's also a little bit tricky to grow in a kind of garden. So if you're buying one for your garden, don't expect it to look as good as that. But I can't wait to be proven wrong on that, and maybe eventually somebody will do that. This is a tree that everybody should know, and if they don't know it, they should grow it if they have space. Magnolia trees grow all over the country. It's just the most incredible thing at this time of the year. You drive around now. I drove through Dublin yesterday, and it was just remarkable looking at all the cherry blossom and all the magnolias starting to come out. There's literally hundreds of varieties of magnolia. I don't know what, there's probably just Soulangeana. There's ones called Susan, one's called, I think, Black Tulip and different things. They are a really, really cool plant that when they're in flower are incredible. A bit boring for the rest of the year, but they're great small plants that do tend to prefer an acidic soil if you can give them one. But yeah, a really cool little plant for a garden. And I've just mentioned these, and these are revered in parts of Is it Japan, where they have a festival of I think maples? German would probably know the name, but flowering cherries, cherry blossom, are just incredible. At the very beginning of this, Dermot talked about where he grew up in Rathfarnham. They had a pink flowering cherry outside the window, but there's so many other varieties that look better than that, and lots of dwarf ones too, and ones that will suit your own garden better. Really cool plants to grow, and the color you get from them and the autumn foliage you also get from them is just nuts. What says you?
Yeah, it's your favorite tree, isn't it?
Well, one of the favorite tree of mine is Prunus Kojo no Mai. So there's a Japanese variety called Kojo no Mai, which is a dwarf cherry, which is more like a shrub, but it's really cool. Kojo no Mai, Maja, I think it is. It's a really, really cool plant.
And
Just the flowers.
it's not just the flowers, the bark. Where in Newry?
Yeah, that's Betula nigra, I'd say.
And we planted, was it Betula utilis or?
No, we planted that. We planted
planted
that same
Betula,
variety.
yeah.
It's an American water birch.
So anything with a lovely bark, Prunus cerula. I planted one in a big, in a very large pot on the terrace last year, didn't I?
Yeah.
With a mahogany colored bark. So yeah, it's not just the form of the tree, it's not just the foliage, the shape, the flower, but how fast it grows to create that privacy that we're all after with trees. It is also, there's a big mistake bringing the dog in. It is also bark. And when we talk about bark, this is one of my favorite trees. So Arbutus unido, the Killarney strawberry tree. I have a lovely little one. I have unido. It is unido growing in my garden. Really lovely little one. I've grown up with one outside the RT canteen. It's not unido, but it's one of these Mediterranean trees.
Arachnoides, which is a hybrid between the native one and the kind of more European one. But
so it's evergreen. It produces a flower and a fruit at the same time. It's an absolutely gorgeous shape. It takes a while to get established, but very definitely worth having.
And it's native to this country,
Which is weird.
Yeah.
Which is just too strange. I talked about olive trees earlier on. This is a garden that we created in a place called Ez, out in France. We reconditioned the olive trees, the existing olive trees that were a bit worn out by some pruning, and planted domes of primarily taxus underneath. Love this. Just behind. It's just a pine been pruned in the Orient. The care and attention that goes into this. And look at that. Is that bamboo scaffolding? I know they use bamboo scaffolding, but just, yeah, not much health and safety going on there, but it makes a nice picture. And towards at the end, just to show, in a way, to point out the danger. So this could have been, this olive in this particular case from Crete in Greece, could have been hit by Zayala, and you can just, that trunk tells a story, doesn't it? How long it's been there, the beauty of it. I have a bit of an issue with trees like this been taken from olive groves and brought to London or brought to Dublin or whatever. You see a tree like that and you know that it wants to be baked in the sun. It might grow here, but it doesn't really want to be here. So just be careful what you use, and maybe we should understand our obligations. Finally, I'm going to show you something that isn't a tree.
That's how you end the talk about trees.
Well, it was a tree because it's a telegraph pole.
It was a tree in another life.
It was a tree in another life. So this is
again one.
It's a telegraph pole in Enniskerry in County Wicklow. And it's been used, the homeowner, the gardener here has decided that the telephone pole was a little bit ugly. So he or she planted a wisteria, and wisteria always grow, I think it's clockwise. So you have the architecture of that, you have those branches flying out, and you have this almost teepee effect. We know that there are chain link fences, wisteria tents that are created to support structures like that, but it almost is a tree.
It kind of has that effect. It's got layers and like a pine tree, and it's got the flower. And when it's in leaf, it looks fantastic. I'd be sold on that.
Are we going to? Oh no, we put it on for an hour and 15 minutes, so we should get everything in. So what?
The tree.
Oh, that's doing a great job, and of course we'll take credit for tree planting because we'll tell the lads.
Well, this is the perfect time to use that old proverb that says, "Society grows great when old men plant trees whose shade they know they shall never sit in," and you're about to plant a tree that shade you'll never sit in.
Sorry, run that by me again.
It's either Japanese or Chinese proverb that says, "Society grows great when old men plant trees whose shade they know they shall never sit in."
Talk about shade.
Well,
Yeah, I'm not bad at throwing a bit of shade, are you, Paul?
well, it's a good one to end on.
Or can we do Q&A just before we go out into the garden to plant a tree, or if people want to come live. So,
what are the best trees for Seaside Garden, west of Ireland, very windy?
So this is from Pauline. Hi, Pauline. What are the best trees for Seaside Garden, west of Ireland, very windy site? Pine trees will work the Scots pine.
Yeah.
Scots pine is probably a good one for that. Very challenging site and situation in that case. What else would?
Rowan mountain ash trees are, the hint is in the name, mountain ash, so they are able to take quite a battering. We actually spoke about this earlier, the Leylandii tree, you could use it as more of a shelter belt, and sometimes people, plant kind of nearly sacrificial trees to then plant some nicer trees behind if you've got the space. What else grows? The hawthorn grow quite well maybe not directly hit by the sea winds, but in a coastal position. Olearia, it's more of a small shrub or large shrub, small tree. Phormium in that same kind of vein. Sacrificial plant.
What you might want to do is create a number of different barriers. So using things like Olearia and Phormiums and whatever, creating a bit of a shelter belt, and behind that, get your young Scots pine or any of these trees establishing and strong. But we've been down to Ballinskelligs in Peter's garden. We've seen the pine was growing magnificently there. So I'd say that's
and then Ross there does a lovely pine.
O'Leary for Seaside, that's right. Some nice, this is from Liz, some nice flowering cherry trees that Paul mentioned available in the Enable Ireland Garden Centre in Sandymount. So I've seen this online on Instagram that Enable Ireland have started an online garden centre, and it's a great idea to support that. Now, is there a way that we can talk to people? And let's unmute everybody and see if anybody would like to say anything, ask ultimate. So if you would like to unmute yourself and put your hand up, and if you have any questions, and it'd be great to chat to you. No.
I had.
Hi, Lynn.
Hi, quick question for you guys. Horse chestnut trees. I had, just as a family one that we had for growing for years and years, and I was wondering how I could. I've just moved into a new place, actually near enough Tenniskerry, and I'm from Galway originally. So I'm trying to wonder how I could grow this, how I could propagate this horse chestnut tree.
So I would say,
does it conquer is the old one that you have in
Which
Galway?
is a seed.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I've tried this, and I actually tried this already. I thought it was. I put the conkers into compost and tried to germinate them, but nothing happened. So.
And do no seedlings germinate themselves from the conkers?
most people
Ground.
find it easier to take over those in the evening.
Nothing the last time, but maybe I had the wrong conditions,
The medicine has
Sorry,
to
I
go
just have background noise.
sort of takes it out of the body for a long
The
time.
conkers are
So
definitely
if you take it in the evening,
sometimes
all
three actually need into
you
growth.
sort of
So
sleep,
either in a warm
off
place,
of it.
they're really
And
cold
it's
part of the
smaller
garden.
in the morning.
Sometimes people put things in fridges for 6 to 8
But
and then start that.
the reality is that this is not,
Maybe get the
honestly, this sort of thing is not
Or
rocket, it's not rocket science. There's no,
next
it's
spring
not like landing a rocket at the exact point.
might help, but
Yeah.
it's one way of kind of getting around that, because most plants kind of prefer to have winter before they start to germinate. That might work.
Sorry, I missed that, guys. But just there was background noise I couldn't hear. But just you're saying to try the conkers.
Yeah, try the conkers again, but
Yeah,
give them
again.
So put them, and even if you need to put them in the fridge for 8 weeks beforehand.
Okay.
Put them
Yeah.
in the fridge for 8 weeks after you harvest them, even longer, 8-10 weeks, and then take them out and maybe plant them at the turn of the new year, and they should be okay. It is a case of giving them a cold snap, because a lot of tree seeds, native tree seeds, need a cold snap before they germinate. But conkers should germinate pretty easily.
Okay. Probably my mishandling of it. And last question: would there be any point in taking a cutting and trying to do something with that? No.
The chestnuts are difficult from cuttings. The seed is much easier. You're going to try it. Definitely go for the seed.
Okay. Okay. Thanks, guys.
Sometimes, Lynn, it's just a case of not looking out for the conkers that have grown, and you just wouldn't notice a young seedling emerging. So
Okay.
if you look out for it, the other interesting thing that Paul has just said there about the cold treatment, plants are amazing, and some plants that, for instance, in Australia, when they produce seed, the seed actually needs to be burnt. Other seeds need to be scarified in different ways, scraped or whatever,
Yeah.
which are all echoing what might be going on in the natural habitat and climate where they live. Others have to go through the whole, eaten by animals that go through the whole system so that their outer coats can be burnt off. It is quite amazing.
Got it. Yeah. Okay. No, appreciate that, guys. Thanks, Mel.
No problem. Best of luck with it. Any other?
I have a question there, Diarmuid, if you can hear me okay.
Yeah, Cormac, go ahead.
Cormac, yeah. I have a number of Italian elder trees. We probably had about 15 initially. We only have about 3 or 4 left. There's definitely a disease going through them over the last 10 years or more. And I'm just wondering, the ones that are still healthy, they seem to be starting to get something, I don't know what it is, where the bark gets kind of lumpy. And I'm wondering, should I have them taken out?
It's very tough that. First of all, from here, we can't identify what it is. So we're going to be cautious about anything we say, because that may involve you taking down a tree. But in general, if you've had that experience, yes, I think it's the...
Probably, yeah. There's something underlying there. There's a bigger problem. So take them out and start again with something totally different.
Yeah, because the 2 or 3 that are remaining have now become like pretty enormous. Like they must be 30 meters or maybe, about 30 meters. They're big. They're big now. I didn't think they'd get big, but they got big. But anyway, I just, it's only now I can see whatever the problem was in the historical trees, they seem to be creeping in. So I was wondering, should you just let them die naturally, or should you, intervene, as it were?
Do us a favor, will you take a photograph of them and will you send it to either of our Instagram accounts, and we'll just take a look at it.
Yeah.
So you'll find me on at Diarmuid
I have
Gavin.
you there. No, I'm a follower, as they say. So yeah, I'll ping it over to you.
Don't send it to at Mike. What's Mike's Instagram?
The gardener.
Don't send it to at Mike the gardener.
Okay.
Just a little piece of advice between you and me. It's not slanderous, I don't think, but
Okay, so avoid Mike the gardener is what I'm hearing.
Go straight
All
through.
right. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
okay. Paul is calling time because we're about to go out into the garden and plant a tree. Now, we hope this is going to work.
Probably won't, but
So I have to untape the iPad with the brand new gaffer tape. Whoop.
oh,
No, we're still there. I'm feeling it all. This is rather surreal. Now, as we walk through the garden, we want you to close your eyes because it's a mess.
observations are welcome.
And we'll see if the link goes, we'll come back. We'll renew the link from 4G in less than a minute. Oh, and we have a plaque from the department. Let's have a look at the plaque before we get done. So that says March 2021, International Year of Plant Health, 2020 Native Irish Tree planted to commemorate National Tree Week.
Do I have to go? with my eyes.
There's the what? How can we tell if we're still on Zoom?
People are.
Oh yeah, we're there. Oh, we're on 4G. Somebody wave at us. Mike, I can never tell if you're alive or not, but yeah, you are. Yeah, very good. Okay, there's the boys who've been digging the holes, and will one of you take that and just be a little bit careful where you hold it, either by there or the and yeah, but you're trying to film us. This is a Quercus robra. Heavy, and it's huge.
One lad.
Planting hole absolutely perfect. Really good soil. And now I have to see if I can remember how to use a spade. Yeah. There you go. And that is that our Quercus, Mike, that's how you do it. Our Quercus robra planted in the corner of the garden. I'll just take that and show you Paul still at it there. So Paul, the last thing we'd like to say on behalf of the Department of Agriculture and the United Nations International Year of Plant Health, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, and join us any weekday evening between 7 and 8 o'clock on our Instagram. We hope you've learned something and
Like how to plant a tree.
like how to plant a tree. And it's been great fun. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wonderful. That's great seeing everyone.